We've developed a curious habit of treating love as though it were a treasure hunt, something you find rather than something you build, and this fundamental misunderstanding might explain why so many of us stand paralyzed at the edge of commitment, terrified that the person in front of us isn't quite right, that something better exists just around the corner, that we're settling if we choose this imperfect human over the idealized version we've constructed in our minds. The question, what is love, has been asked so many times it borders on cliché, but perhaps we've been asking it wrong. Love isn't a what so much as a how, not a destination you arrive at but a series of choices you make repeatedly, often inconveniently, sometimes against your own immediate self-interest. The modern approach to relationships carries within it a strange contradiction. We're told to love unconditionally while simultaneously maintaining an exhaustive checklist of conditions. We want someone who makes us laugh but also takes us seriously, who gives us space but also pursues us, who accepts us completely while inspiring us to grow. We expect chemistry and compatibility, passion and stability, independence and intimacy, often failing to recognize that these qualities exist in tension with one another, that choosing one frequently means compromising another. The Disney industrial complex sold us the idea that love means finding someone who fits perfectly into our life as it currently exists, requiring no adjustment, no sacrifice, no fundamental rethinking of our priorities. Real love, the kind that lasts beyond the intoxication of newness, begins precisely where that fairy tale ends, when you realize that building a life with someone means rebuilding yourself in small and large ways, over and over again. Commitment issues, that phrase we throw around so casually, often stem less from an inability to commit and more from a refusal to accept the terms of what commitment actually requires. We've somehow convinced ourselves that the right person will make commitment feel effortless, that if it's difficult then it must be wrong, that real love shouldn't require quite so much work. This is perhaps the most destructive myth we've inherited about romance. Committing to another person means accepting that you will disappoint them, that they will disappoint you, that there will be mornings when you wake up next to them and feel more irritation than affection, evenings when their habits grate on your nerves, periods when the person you chose feels like a stranger you're trapped with. The commitment isn't to a feeling, which fluctuates wildly and unpredictably, but to a decision, the decision that this person, with all their flaws and contradictions, is worth the sustained effort of building something that transcends individual happiness. Watch how people behave when relationships hit their first major obstacle. A fight that reveals genuine incompatibility in values, a life crisis that exposes different coping mechanisms, a moment when the romance recedes and reveals the mundane reality underneath. The contemporary response is often immediate evaluation. Is this relationship still serving me? Am I getting what I need? Should I stay or should I go? These questions aren't inherently wrong, but they reveal how thoroughly we've absorbed the consumer mindset into our intimate lives. We approach relationships like products that should deliver consistent satisfaction, and when they fail to meet our specifications, we contemplate returning them for something better. The alternative framework, less popular but arguably more realistic, suggests that obstacles aren't defects in the relationship but rather the relationship itself, that love is specifically what happens when you work through difficulty rather than around it. The running away impulse lives in all of us, hardwired by evolution to avoid pain and seek pleasure. When a relationship becomes uncomfortable, when it demands more than we feel capable of giving, when it challenges our self-conception or requires us to examine our own shortcomings, the exit door glows with seductive appeal. Starting over with someone new offers the intoxicating possibility of getting it right this time, of avoiding the mistakes that led to this particular impasse, of being appreciated for who we are rather than criticized for who we're not. What this fantasy conveniently omits is that you bring yourself into every new relationship, complete with all the patterns and wounds and defense mechanisms that contributed to the previous failure. The person changes but the problems often migrate because they were never exclusively about the other person to begin with. Long-term relationships operate on principles that directly contradict what we're taught to value in contemporary culture. They require loyalty over optimization, consistency over excitement, showing up over keeping options open. The early stages of love flood us with dopamine and make everything feel significant and charged with meaning. You can talk for hours without noticing time passing. Their flaws seem charming rather than annoying. The future stretches ahead with infinite possibility. Then, inevitably, neurochemistry normalizes. You've heard most of their stories. You know how they'll react to various situations. The mystery dissolves into familiarity, and familiarity, unless actively cultivated into something else, can curdle into contempt. The couples who make it past this stage aren't necessarily the ones who found perfect matches but the ones who decided that the known quantity of their partner was more valuable than the unknown promise of someone else. Expectations might be love's most complicated component. We need them. Relationships without expectations aren't relationships but casual arrangements, yet they're also the mechanism by which we transform other people into disappointment machines. When you expect your partner to intuitively understand your needs without articulation, to provide consistent emotional support while also giving you space, to remember important dates and surprise you with spontaneous gestures and maintain their own independent life, you've set up a system where failure is inevitable. The question isn't whether your partner will fail to meet your expectations but how you'll respond when they do. Will you treat each failure as evidence that they don't love you enough, that you chose wrong, that you deserve better? Or will you recognize that expectations exist as negotiation points rather than moral absolutes, that the gap between what you want and what someone can give you is where actual relationship work happens? The idea of giving everything to someone sounds romantic until you examine what it actually entails. Total sacrifice, complete merger, the dissolution of individual identity into couplehood, these concepts appear regularly in love songs and romance novels and almost never in functional long-term partnerships. Giving everything to another person doesn't create intimacy, it creates resentment and suffocation. What healthy love requires is more paradoxical. The ability to give fully while maintaining self, to be vulnerable while retaining boundaries, to prioritize someone else's needs without erasing your own. The couples who sustain affection over decades haven't eliminated the self versus relationship tension but have learned to navigate it with something approaching grace, recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is maintain your own identity strongly enough that you have something substantial to bring to the partnership. Consider the mathematics of expectations in long-term relationships. If you enter with a list of 10 non-negotiable requirements and your partner enters with their own 10, you've created a system where both of you are constantly being measured against 20 different metrics. Each person wakes up every day knowing they're failing multiple tests simultaneously. The relationship becomes an ongoing performance review where security is always conditional on meeting standards that may shift without warning. The alternative approach, starting with one or two genuine deal breakers and treating everything else as preference rather than requirement, creates space for both people to be human, to have bad days, to grow in unexpected directions without threatening the relationship's foundation. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or abandoning standards, but rather distinguishing between core values and aesthetic preferences, between patterns and moments, between who someone is and what they did yesterday. The work of love reveals itself most clearly in conflict. How you fight with someone, what you fight about, and how you repair afterward tells you more about the relationship's viability than how you feel during good times. Anyone can be loving when things are easy. The measure of partnership is what happens when someone disappoints you, when you disagree fundamentally, when their pain makes demands on your time and energy that you weren't planning to give. Do you retreat into self-protection or lean into the discomfort? Do you keep score or assume good intent? Do you use their vulnerabilities as weapons or hold them carefully even when angry? These aren't questions of personality but of choice, decisions made in moments when every instinct screams at you to defend, deflect, or withdraw. The reason most relationships fail isn't incompatibility but unwillingness to develop the skills that make compatibility possible. The ability to communicate clearly, to listen generously, to apologize genuinely, to forgive without holding grudges, to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't. Modern dating culture, with its abundance of options and gamified swipe mechanics, has created a peculiar problem: the illusion that perfect matches exist if you just search long enough. Every person you meet gets evaluated against an idealized composite constructed from the best qualities of everyone you've ever dated, plus characteristics you've decided you need based on how previous relationships failed. This hypothetical perfect person would have your ex's sense of humor but without their anxiety, that attractive stranger's ambition but without their workaholism, your friend's emotional availability but without their neediness. The person standing in front of you, actual and flawed and complex, never quite measures up to this phantom. So you keep looking, keep swiping, keep believing that compatibility is something you discover rather than something you create through sustained attention and effort. The concept of the one does tremendous damage to our ability to love real people. It suggests that successful relationships are primarily about selection rather than cultivation, that if you find the right person the rest will be easy. This framework makes every difficulty feel like evidence of wrong choice. If you have to work this hard, maybe they're not the one. If it doesn't feel effortless, maybe you're forcing something that isn't meant to be. But talk to couples who've been together for 30 or 40 years, who've weathered illnesses and financial crises and the deaths of parents and the challenges of raising children, and they'll tell you something different. They didn't find the one, they became the one for each other through accumulation of shared experience and deliberate choice. The relationship you have at year 20 barely resembles the relationship you had at year 2, not because you found a better person but because you both became different people and chose to become them together. What frightens people about commitment isn't actually permanence but vulnerability. Committing to someone means giving them extraordinary power to hurt you, exposing your flaws and fears and secrets, trusting that they'll handle these fragile things with care. It means accepting that you can't control how they'll change over time, that the person you commit to at 25 might become someone quite different by 40, and you're betting that those changes will be compatible with your own evolution. The commitment phobic aren't necessarily afraid of being trapped but of being seen completely and found wanting, of investing years into building something that could still collapse, of choosing wrong in a decision that carries enormous consequences. These fears aren't irrational. Relationships do fail. People do change in incompatible ways. The pain of breakup is real and sometimes devastating. But the alternative, maintaining perpetual optionality, never fully investing, always keeping one foot out the door, guarantees you'll never experience the particular kind of intimacy that only long-term commitment makes possible. Expectations around what love should feel like create endless trouble. We expect sustained passion, constant validation, ongoing growth, deep understanding, exciting sex, emotional security, intellectual stimulation, and shared values. When the reality delivers some of these some of the time, we wonder if we're missing out on something more. This calculation is endless and unwinnable because there's always someone taller, funnier, richer, more understanding, better at communication, more sexually compatible, whatever quality your current partner lacks. The question isn't whether someone better exists in theory but whether better exists in practice, whether starting over with someone new would actually produce superior results or just different problems. Most people who leave relationships for something better discover that better comes with its own complications, that the grass is greener where you water it, and that the excitement of newness eventually gives way to the same mundane reality they were trying to escape. The give and take of partnership requires calibration that takes years to develop. How much should you sacrifice for someone else's dream? When does supporting become enabling? How do you maintain your own needs without being selfish? These questions don't have universal answers because every relationship requires its own unique balance, negotiated continuously through changing circumstances. The distribution of emotional labor, financial responsibility, domestic work, social planning, and decision-making power shifts over time as jobs change, kids arrive, health fails, parents age, ambitions evolve. Couples who weather these transitions successfully don't do so because they found perfect balance from the start but because they developed the ability to renegotiate as needed, to name resentments before they become toxic, to take turns carrying more weight, to recognize that fairness over decades looks different than fairness in any given week. Love also requires accepting that you cannot save anyone. The fantasy that your love will heal someone's wounds, fix their problems, make them whole, this is not love but a hero complex dressed in romantic language. People don't complete each other, they choose to build something together while remaining fundamentally incomplete. Your partner's anxiety, depression, addiction, or trauma are theirs to manage, and while you can support their efforts, you cannot do the work for them. The boundary between supportive partnership and codependent enmeshment is crucial but often invisible until you've crossed it. Giving everything to someone doesn't mean taking responsibility for their emotional state, their happiness, their growth. It means showing up consistently, offering support when asked, maintaining your own stability so you have something solid to offer, and recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable behavior that hurts them. The running away impulse deserves more examination because it's not always wrong. Some relationships should end. Abuse, fundamental value misalignment, incompatible life goals, sustained mistreatment, these are legitimate reasons to leave, and the cultural pressure to work things out has kept many people trapped in situations that were damaging them. The skill lies in distinguishing between relationships that are difficult because they're wrong and relationships that are difficult because growth is difficult. Are you running from a bad relationship or from the uncomfortable feeling of being known? Are you leaving because your needs genuinely can't be met or because meeting them would require changes you're unwilling to make? Are you searching for something better or avoiding something real? These distinctions matter enormously, and getting them wrong in either direction, staying too long in something harmful or leaving too quickly from something salvageable, can shape your entire life trajectory. What sustains love over time isn't the absence of difficulty but the development of tools to navigate difficulty together. Communication skills that allow you to express needs without attacking. Repair mechanisms that prevent small hurts from becoming permanent rifts. The ability to tolerate discomfort without immediately seeking escape. The willingness to examine your own contribution to problems rather than focusing exclusively on your partner's failures. These aren't innate talents but learned capacities, and many relationships fail not because the people were incompatible but because neither person developed the skills that make compatibility possible. We invest enormous energy in finding the right person and almost no energy in becoming the right person, in developing our capacity for patience, generosity, forgiveness, honesty, and repair. Perhaps love is best understood not as a feeling that happens to you but as a practice you cultivate, something closer to a skill than an emotion. You wouldn't expect to play piano beautifully without practice, yet we expect to navigate the complex emotional choreography of long-term partnership without training or effort. We wait for love to feel easy, natural, effortless, and when it doesn't we assume we're doing it wrong. But the couples who make it aren't the ones for whom it came easily but the ones who decided the difficulty was worthwhile, who chose each other repeatedly through changing circumstances, who learned to find the person they fell in love with even when that person was buried under stress or grief or the accumulated disappointments of daily life. They gave everything not in the sense of total sacrifice but in the sense of full presence, showing up completely, staying when it was hard, choosing partnership even when solitude seemed appealing, building something that transcended what either person could create alone.